everyone, I'm Katerina from PurePack and I'm the assistant manager. I'll be doing the commentary for your picker induction pre-work today. So hopefully you don't get too sick of my voice, but here we go. So first we're going to talk about just what is picking. So you're working outside, you're picking cherries. The work is very weather dependent. Using a buckets and picker cradles, you're working in groups of 25 to 50 other pickers. There's a few key hazards to be aware of. There's a few hazards, but the key ones are working with ladders, long periods of standing, machinery and vehicles, lifting and carrying, and the sun and heat down here in central Otago. So the crop timing. Okay, so we have 11 different varieties of cherries at PurePack. We're a cooperative, so we've got, I think it's, well, I can't quite remember how many orchards exactly, but it equates to 11 different varieties of cherries. And they're all ready at different times. So we sort of classify them as being the early varieties, which are the ones that are usually ripe in December. And they're really popular for domestic market. So we're talking about the New Zealand market for Christmas especially. And then the second sort of category that we talk about is the late varieties, which are mainly geared towards export. So a lot of them end up in Asia and other parts of the world for Lunar New Year. It's really a lot to do with gifting for the Lunar New Year. What this means for you is how your seasonal workflow or workload will kind of look. So when you start with us, assuming you start with us in the first intake, you will be looking, where's my pointer? Here we go, hopefully you can see this. You'll be starting sort of mid-December around here. And we have our early varieties through December, which we have some of, and that's why we do separate intakes. So during December, your workload will be a little bit lighter. You might not have work every day, and it might not be for a full day. You can definitely expect to have a couple of days off. And then we sort of have a bit of a dip where we're sort of transitioning from some of the early varieties into the late varieties. And we just don't have as much volume during that time. And that time usually, depending on the weather, falls sort of between Christmas and New Year's. So you can expect during that time that we'll have a bit less work. And then coming into January, so we're talking early January here, we have quite a big increase in volume that needs to be picked and packed. And so that's when we have our second main intake, is at the beginning of January. So we take on another gang or two of pickers to help us process all this volume that we have in January. So you can expect in January that you'll work 5 to 7 days and that your days will be a bit longer. So we're talking 6 to 10 hours a day in January. I mentioned before gangs, so this is your team of pickers, usually between 25 to 50 people in a gang, and we try to assign it so that you put in a group with sort of the people that you're traveling together with. Right, into some of the health and safety stuff. So ladders. We have a couple of different heights of ladders, but the main ones are sort of, I think, about 2.5 meters high, so they are quite high. And there's a few key things that you need to be aware of when you're working with them. So one of the first things that you need to do is check the condition of your ladder. Make sure that it hasn't been damaged and that it's still in perfectly good working order. The next thing you need to do is wear quite sturdy and closed footwear. That's part of walking around on the orchard, but also so that when you're standing on the ladder, you're nice and secure up there. So when you set up your ladder, you will want to set it up with all 3 points nice and securely on the ground. So we're talking this point 1, point 2, and then point 3 in behind here. You want them to be nice and stable. You've got to look out for things like rabbit holes. We do have some rabbit holes in the orchard. And what you're trying to do when you set up your ladder is make sure that these sort of horizontal bars here are nice and horizontal. If you're on a bit of an angle, by the time you work your way up to the top of the ladder, you're actually starting to become quite unstable. So it's important you make that sure they're horizontal. The other thing you want to look at is the angle between your arm and the rest of the ladder. So your arm is this bit out here. So you want that to be 45 degrees between the arm and the ladder itself. There are stickers on the ladder to indicate how you should be setting that up so that it's nice and stable. What else do I need to talk about? Oh yes, okay, so we need to be pointing our ladder towards the work. So if our tree is up here, then our ladder is pointing towards the tree, and that's the way we want it. You need to be especially careful near the top of the ladder. Don't be standing on this top step. You should be maintaining 3 points of contact at all times, and at the end of the day you need to pack your ladder away. Carrying the ladder. Okay, so there's a couple of ways we can do this, but the key thing is that it needs to be horizontal, and that you're always carrying it at the side of your body, and you're positioning the leg against your body. So we've got 2 different examples of how you can carry the ladder here. One is where you reach through the ladder and hold on to the middle leg. So here our beautiful model has reached through and they've grabbed this middle leg, which is against their body. And that's so that it's not flapping around, and you can keep control of it. And this is sort of a variation, but pretty similar, where you're just grabbing down a bit further, but you're still keeping that leg tucked in against your body. If you're moving a long distance, then you might find it useful to partner up so that one person can be at each end of the ladder, so you can carry 2 ladders between 2 people, and that is quite effective. The ladders are quite long, as we talked about earlier, so you need to watch out for other people, for trees, and for wires and gates and things like that. Just remember that you're now a lot longer than you normally are when you're walking around. Okay, so standing for a long period of time. So this is usually more of an issue in the pack house, but it can also happen on the orchard. So you are going to be on your legs for more than you might usually be, particularly if you've come out of school or university and you're not used to doing a physical job. This could be a little bit of a shock for the system. So we really suggest that you have a good stretch before work. You take short walks when you're on your break to keep things nice and moving, that you shift your balance from foot to foot, so you're not standing completely still, and then doing some squats and standing up again, some people find quite helpful. Lifting and carrying. So I've talked about carrying the ladder, but in general, when you're lifting, carrying and bending, you need to plan your lift. So if you're lifting something, think about, okay, I'm picking this up here, and where am I taking it to? How am I going to get there? So when you bend down, you want to be looking like this chap in the middle here, with the knees bent, and then standing up and pulling the weight in close to your body. Want to avoid bending over like this. You might be fine the first couple of times, but once you've done it a few times, you're really definitely at more risk of doing yourself an injury. If you start to lift something and you're like, oh, actually, this is too heavy for me, just stop and ask someone to help you. That's no problem with asking someone to help you. Vehicles and machinery. Okay, so this is out on the orchard. There will be quad bikes, which is what this guy's driving right here. There'll also be tractors. There could also be utes and hydroladders and all sorts of other orchard machinery. So you need to be just always listening, and especially being very careful when you're coming out the end of a row. So machinery could be moving up and down the headlands. So when you pop out the end of a row, you need to sort of definitely look left and right, same as you sort of would when you're crossing the road. Smoking. Okay, so there's absolutely no smoking in the orchards. You can smoke during your breaks in the parking areas on the gravel. It's really important that you make sure the cigarette butts are properly, really well extinguished and thrown away. It has happened on neighbouring properties to our orchards that fires have started from cigarette butts. So we're not just saying it, it is a real danger. It gets really dry in Central Otago and fires can start very easily. So definitely no smoking in the orchard, and if you are going to smoke, make sure it's well extinguished when you're finished. And continuing on that note, if there is a fire, this is a picture from a fire that happened down near Alexandra a few years ago. If you do hear the air horns go, so we don't have fire alarms because we're outside, but the supervisors do have air horns. So if you hear that honking, then you need to go out the exit that you came in and into the car park, which is typically where the assembly point is. So the assembly point is almost always in the car park. Don't leave the assembly point until the roll call has been completed so that we can account for everyone and make sure that everyone is actually safe and that everyone's got out. If you can't go out the way that you came in, then if your life is in danger and you really urgently need to get out, you can rip through the orchard nets. Obviously I wouldn't be doing that unless you really need to, but you definitely can if that's what you need to do to get out. Okay, sun and heat. Alright, so Central Otago is a very sunny, hot place, which is great for growing cherries, but it also means that we're at quite a high risk of getting sunburnt, and also heat stroke can be a problem too. So sunscreen is provided in the gang boxes by the supervisors. You're also welcome to bring your own sunscreen. I recommend a wide brim hat to keep the sun off the back of your neck, and long sleeve clothing. So clothing tends to be the better way to keep the sun off you and to keep cool. Might sound a bit counterintuitive, but definitely I recommend you cover up. There's also zinc sunscreen. Zinc is more of a blocker and it's better than sunscreen if you've got the option on your nose and lips and things like that. And to stay really well hydrated. So that's got more to do with heat stroke than sunburn. Because it can get hot out there, and if you get dehydrated, it will hit you quite hard. So definitely keep up the water. Sunglasses can't be worn while you're picking, and the reason is that the tint in the sunglasses changes your perception of colour, so you don't know whether the fruit you're picking is ripe or not. So no sunglasses, but you can wear a wide brim hat. Hygiene. Okay, so we're handling obviously fresh fruit, which is not going to be cooked or processed. So we need to be really vigilant, and we're always really vigilant even before COVID times about hygiene. So when you enter the orchard, you need to sanitize your hands, and then after you've used the bathroom, you need to wash your hands and then sanitize again. Sanitizer will be available probably in a few different places, but definitely at the orchard gate and with the picking bins. Keep foreign material out of the buckets. So this is about just making sure that anything that's not really a cherry doesn't go in those buckets, especially blood and cuts. Okay, so that's to do with contaminating the fruit. If someone suffers an injury, we need to make sure that any buckets or fruit that has blood on it get immediately separated out, so that they can be thrown out and cleaned really thoroughly. We can't have blood contaminating the food that people eat. So don't pick with any open wounds, cover cuts or sores. We have blue plasters for you to use if you need to, and that's to make sure that they definitely don't come off your finger and go into a bucket, or that if they do, that the blue plaster can be easily spotted. No jewellery. You must have short nails, no varnish or polish. Notify your manager if you have an infectious disease, or if you think you are starting to have symptoms of a disease. So don't continue to work, stay home and get medical attention. Make sure the packing frames and buckets are clean. If you happen to pick up a bucket that you're going to use and you notice that it's not clean, then you need to tell your supervisor immediately so we can get that sorted. And it's really important for the hygiene of the fruit that you never pick fruit up off the ground. So if you're picking a bunch and you drop one, leave it. Do not pick it up off the ground and put it in your bucket. Alright, continuing on the picking theme. Picking is done in pairs. So how it'll work is we'll pair you up and then your pair will be assigned to a bay. This is the size of a bay can vary between 6 to 10 trees, and it's usually identified by the number of trees between 2 big posts. Your supervisor will assign you to a bay, and you can sort of leapfrog down the bays, which I'll show you in the next slide how that can work. But definitely don't go from one row to the row next to it unless your supervisor explicitly tells you that that's what you're to do. So we recommend that you start, if you're picking, to start at the top of the tree and to work your way down so that you're filling your bucket as you're going down, so you don't end up at the top of the tree with a massively full bucket and having to go up and down the ladder heaps. So if you've finished your side of the tree, and again I'll illustrate this better on the next slide, if you finish your side of the tree, you're welcome to go around and help your partner finish theirs. So you shouldn't be standing there waiting for your partner to finish. You can go around and help them so that you're both finishing your bay at the same time and ready to move on at the same time. So it's a bit of a team effort there. Right, so here's my illustration of the bays. What we need to be, yeah, okay. So we've got, in my picture here, we've got the blue team and we've got the yellow team. These brown circles indicate posts. So between the posts is one bay. So the blue team has this bay here. So what the blue team's going to do is stand on one side each of the tree and they're going to work their way down this bay until they've picked all the fruit off those trees. And then they're going to leapfrog past the yellow team. They're going to do this bay. And then they're going to do all the ones here. And when they get to the end of the row, they're going to find their supervisor, or the supervisor's going to tell them where they can next go. So the supervisor will probably send them up into one of these rows here because that's the same kind of tree. These trees down here, they are a different colour, which I've used to illustrate the fact that they're a different variety of fruit. And how it works is we can't mix varieties in the pack house. So if we're picking lapins, for example, only buckets of lapins can go in those bins. So that's why you can't just go hopping around the orchard unless you've been specifically told. So it's about keeping those varieties the same. Okay. All right, so the colour of cherries that we're trying to pick is really important. So there's sort of a bit of a misconception that cherries are red. What we're actually trying to pick when we're picking cherries is these dark red cherries. Okay, so we describe them as dark red, and I say that sort of loosely because each variety of cherries can be a bit different. But in general, you're looking for the dark ones, and that indicates that they're ripe, that they've got a good sugar content, and they are ready to go and be harvested. So the red cherries, this is what the example is over here, is they're quite bright, which means they're not quite there yet. And if we leave them on the tree and come back in maybe 3 or 4 days, then maybe even a week, they might be ready to go then. So if we pick them when they're red, then we've kind of missed the opportunity and they'll never get to be big dark red cherries ready for harvesting. The other key thing that we're trying to avoid putting in our buckets is split cherries or evidently rotten cherries. So we don't want anything that's visibly got a defect to go in our buckets. Cherries are quite delicate. They need quite gentle handling. So what we say to treat them like eggshells, and that means that rather than sort of dropping them in your bucket, you need to place them in your bucket. So if the supervisor walks down the row and they can hear sort of like thunk, thunk, thunk of buckets of cherries hitting the bottom of the bucket, then they know that you're dropping them in the bucket rather than placing them in the bucket, and that fruit is now bruised, which means we can't sell it like that. So that's why it's so important to just go the extra half a second and make sure it gets placed in the bucket rather than sort of just thrown in there. Fingernails, there we've said earlier that we need to keep them short, and that's because they can puncture the cherries, and then again, once it's got a hole in it, it's a defect and we can't sell it. So also rotten fruit, it can infect other fruit, so it needs to be thrown away. Fruit with bird poo has to stay out of the buckets as well and be thrown away. How you're going to pick cherries, and you will have seen this on a couple of different of the previous slides, that we're not handling them by the cherry, we're always handling them by the stem here. So in this example, you can see we're picking it by the green stem. And it's key that we pick them, we don't pull on them. A spur. Okay, so what we're talking about here when we talk about a spur is these sort of, they're like little branches, but they're not really branches. They're a little bit wrinkly, you'll see like this. And what that is where the cherries grow on every year. So you can see that we're growing cherries off the end of this one here. And you can see on this photo, which I took earlier in the year during spring, that we've got blossoms on the end of this one. So they will become cherries when they're pollinated. If you're not picking correctly, you'll end up ripping the whole spur off. And when you do that, a bunch of leaves come off with it, and your supervisor will notice that there's lots of leaves in your bucket, which they might talk to you about, and they'll notice that there's lots of leaves and spurs on the underneath the tree where you've been picking, which means if you're ripping off the spur, this wrinkly bit, that's not going to grow fruit again. So now it's permanently damaged, and that piece of wood there is never going to grow another piece of fruit. So it's really important that we're not ripping off those spurs, and so making sure that we keep our orchards productive. Methods. Okay, so each sort of different orchard and pack house in Cromwell and even wider central Otago, we all have potentially slightly different ways of harvesting our crop. So one way that we do is the cluster pick, which means that you're allowed to pick bunches of cherries. So when I say a bunch, I mean that they are allowed to be connected together. So here we've got 2 and here we've got 3. And that's fine. You can pick bunches of good cherries when we're cluster picking. You might also be asked to do singulation, which is where you're only picking the good cherries, but you're picking them individually. So you're only picking them like this, which means if you pick up a bunch that you have to separate them before they put them in your bucket. The last method is the strip pick, which is a variation of cluster picking, but it's where you're much less selective on any quality or size or defects in the fruit. You're really stripping every piece of fruit off the tree, and it can be connected. So that's what we're talking about with a strip pick. Normally, most of the time, we will always cluster pick. We prefer that because it's faster for you guys. You can fill your bucket up faster, and we have special equipment in the pack house to separate the clusters. So not every pack house has that equipment, and that's something that we've decided to invest in. Right, so the picker number. Now this is pretty key. This is how we know which buckets are yours, and so which buckets we need to pay you for. So when you're go to your on-site induction, you'll be given a picker number, and that's going to be your number for the season. That's how we're going to identify your buckets when they come into the system. So every morning when you arrive at the orchard, your supervisor will provide you with sheets of barcode stickers. They'll have your picker number on them, and I think there's about 80 on a sheet. So that's what you can use for the day to label your buckets with. So each of the stickers, even though they might look the same, are actually unique. So what that means is they can't be used twice, which I'll talk more about shortly. If you do get to the orchard and there's none of your stickers available, then talk to your supervisor and they can get some more printed for you pretty quickly. The other thing that you'll be issued with at your on-site induction will be a name badge, and that will have your name on it and your picker number. And that is another barcode. Again, it looks the same as your picker labels, but this one is used for scanning in to your timesheet. So when you arrive to the orchard, you'll have to go to the supervisor and get your name tag scanned so that they know that you've arrived, and then again at the end when you leave so that they know that you've left, and that's part of your timesheeting system. So really important to keep that card with you. The picker label gets placed on this top band here of the bucket. It gets placed either on this side or on the back side, but make sure that you don't put it on the sides. So where on the sides here where the handle connects, don't put any labels there. Yeah, on the top lip of the front or the back of your bucket, and not on the sides of with the handles. So the sticker is quite sticky, but it does pay to make sure that there's not any dust on that part of the bucket, or that it's not wet, just to make sure that it does stick long enough to get scanned so that it can be processed and that you'll get paid for it. So the rule is no sticker, no pay. If there's an old sticker on the bucket and you haven't removed it, it might get scanned and then it will show up in our system as a duplicate, because like I said, every sticker is unique, and so you won't get paid. So old sticker, no pay. Reused sticker, no pay. So if you happen to pick up a bucket and you see it's got an old sticker on it, but it's your sticker, your picker number, you still need to take it off and put a new one on, because each sticker is unique, and once it's been scanned and processed in the system, we can't scan and process it again. So whatever you do, always take the old sticker off and put the new one on. If you forget to put a sticker on your bucket, the supervisor will try to find out who the bucket belongs to, but it's really your responsibility to make sure that your stickers are going on your buckets. The buckets are around about 5 kilos. It's important to fill them up to the top line. If it's not full enough, and then the supervisor or the bucket assistants will bring it back to you so that you can top it up. It's also important not to overfill it. If it's too full, then we can't stack them without crushing the cherries. And of course, once they're crushed, they're no good either. Once you've finished your bucket, you've filled it up to the line, you need to just tuck it in under a tree in the shade. There will be bucket runners or bucket assistants, they go by either name, who will come along and collect your buckets, scan them into a big bin, and then transport them to the pack house from there. Here we go. Picking speed. Okay, so there is an expectation that you achieve a certain picking speed, so, or an average number of buckets per hour. And we recognise that when you first start, especially if you've never picked cherries before, you might be a bit slower. So we do understand that it'll take you a while to sort of get good at it, and we expect by the 3rd day that you're reaching that sort of minimum level that we expect. You will be issued at your induction, your on-site induction, with the picker cradle. So this is one of the cradle types that we have. There's some sort of green harness type thing. It's also called a picker frame or a picker harness. You will have signed a cradle agreement when you signed your employment agreement with us, and it's your responsibility for the season to look after it, make sure it doesn't get damaged, make sure it doesn't get lost, and of course if something does go wrong with it, by all means tell your supervisor or talk to HR and they will sort you out to get it fixed or repaired if that needs to happen. If at the end of the season you don't return your cradle or your picker frame to the HR office, then that will result in an $80 deduction from your pay so that we can replace it. So at the end of the season, I recommend when you're checking out of your accommodation, you're finishing up, all the cherries are harvested, make sure that you go and take your picker cradle to the HR office. Then you know that it's been handed in and processed correctly. If you give it to your friend to take in and they don't do it properly, then you might have an $80 deduction. Pay calculation. Okay, so how this works is you will always be paid minimum wage no matter what. But if you want to do better than that, and most people do want to do better than that, we assign a bucket rate to each bucket. And the bucket rate is decided based on the picking method that we're using. So if we're singulating or single picking cherries, then you can expect the bucket rate would be higher. If we're cluster picking, it might be a bit lower because we expect that you'll be able to fill your bucket faster. So we've made it easy for you by allowing cluster picking. Also, if there's a really big crop and you're going to fill your bucket fast, then that's awesome. If it's quite a light crop and actually we know that it's going to take you a bit longer to fill your bucket, then we might increase the bucket rate. So we're not trying to set that at an unachievable rate. We want most people to be able to achieve it. And how we calculate that is, I've given an example. Let's, in our example, say that the bucket rate for the day is $6 and you've worked for 8 hours and you've managed to pick 30 buckets. So the minimum pay that you'll always get is your 8 hours times $20, which would be $160. And then we next need to calculate if you've earned a bonus as well. So what we do is we calculate the bucket rate times 30 buckets. So that's 30 buckets times $6 is 180. And 180 is more than 160, so that means that you've earned a $20 bonus for that day's work. This is of course all before any taxes or accommodation deductions and things like that. Work hours. So we talked about earlier the sort of workflow that you can expect, how you can expect that in December the work might not be as much, and then in January when we get into our late varieties, that there'd be a lot more work. You can expect to work more days and you can expect the days to be longer. So typically we work between 6 AM and 6 PM. The work hours vary and it completely depends on the weather and the ripeness of the cherries. So I would love to be able to tell you that we're going to work Monday to Friday and we're going to work 8 hours a day and that's going to be it, but we just don't know. The cherries can move really quickly, 1 or 2 days of warm weather, and it can bring them forward really quickly, make them ripe really quickly, and a few days of cold weather and we might not see any progress and there's just nothing ready to pick. So we are completely at the mercy of what the weather is doing and how the cherries are ripe, and that means that so are you guys. We're not trying to be vague about that, that's just the reality of the situation. If it gets too hot, we will stop picking, and that's for 2 reasons, because the fruit can bruise easily, it gets soft when it's hot, and also it's really uncomfortable for you guys out there picking when it really gets up there with the temperature. Also, if it rains and the equipment's wet, then we might have to stop work because it's a safety issue. You're already on ladders, and when we start adding sort of wet ladder rungs and steps to it, it's just too dangerous. If there's a lot of rain, that might mean that we have to take 1 or 2 days even away from picking, and that's not because it's safety anymore, that's because the fruit can get really waterlogged and it can start to get really soft, and we need to give the fruit time to recover before it's actually in a harvestable state. Breaks. Okay, so in your employment agreement, I believe it's kind of close to the back of the employment agreement, you will see the breaks laid out. So how this works in practicality is that the whole picking gang will stop and take the break together. They're not optional. Everyone does need to stop and take them. But it's not only about legal compliance, it's also about managing health and safety, making sure that you've had your water to keep hydrated, that you've got some food in your system, and that you're feeling good and ready to keep going. Conduct. Okay, so this is getting to the nitty-gritty stuff. We have a 3-strike policy. So first, if something's going wrong, you'll be given a verbal warning. Then you'll have, if something happens again, you'll get a disciplinary meeting with the orchard manager. And then following on from that, there'd be a written warning. So the types of things that could cause this to happen or to result in warnings would be things like excessive leaf and spur damage. So if you're repeatedly ripping off spurs and not really taking any care with the way you're picking, if you're damaging a lot of fruit, if you're picking rotten fruit or diseased fruit, if you're doing something questionable with your bucket labels, putting them on the wrong bucket or giving your labels to someone else, if you're within sort of 3 days once you've had a go at it and had a chance to learn, if you're not meeting the minimum bucket rate, if you're moving full buckets when you shouldn't be, if you're breaking any health and safety rules, if you're using any machinery that you shouldn't be, if you are absent without telling us, or if you disappear from work without telling us, not following your supervisor's instructions, physical and verbal abuse to other staff, theft, vandalism, or not following our COVID protocols are all types of things that could be considered misconduct. Transport. Okay, so we have 11 different orchards. They're all sort of around the Cromwell Basin, and it's your responsibility to be able to get to and from work. In the handbook, you'll see in the first few pages there's maps and instructions on how to get to each orchard. We do have some transport available for people who have no other way to get to work, but this needs to be organised in advance. So if you haven't already organised that, you need to get in touch with HR ASAP. So where we're looking here for transport is this is Cromwell. This is our pack house out here in Bannockburn. We also have some orchards in Bannockburn. We have quite a few orchards in this Pisa area, Mount Pisa, and we have one orchard out in Queensberry out here. So from Cromwell to Bannockburn is about a 7-minute drive, just for your reference. The workday, okay. So we use the PurePack portal, so the same system that you use to apply for a job with us. We use that to send out text messages and information about when the next work is and where it is. Your gang leader might also tell you. So at the end of the day, your gang leader might already know, and they might say, look, tomorrow we're at the same place and we're starting at 7 AM or 6:30 AM or whatever it's going to be. We use that same software for the timesheeting. It's important that you have your ID card with your barcode on it so that you can scan in and out of your timesheet and that that's accurately recorded. This is, yeah, I've already said that. That's important for the payroll, so don't skip on that. It'll also be used for contact tracing in the event that there is a COVID outbreak amongst our team. at the end of the day, it's important that you do scan out so that we know that everyone's made it out of the orchard and is on their way home. So it's a bit of a health and safety thing as well as just time sheeting. COVID. So our COVID policies and procedures are being regularly reviewed. You'll all be well aware by this point that the recommendations from government and from other industry bodies and the rules are always changing, and so we're always changing what we're doing in line with that. But in general, you can expect that the protocols that you have when you come to work at PurePack will be more stringent and probably stricter than what is happening out in the community and what's happening at other businesses, because we are handling food and because we're exporting. So I hope that you're all on board with that and that you understand the reason that we are possibly doing sort of, I guess, what you might think are more extreme measures is because we have such massive risk as handling food and being exporters. So I hope you can all respect that and that you'll help us make sure that we do everything we can to minimise the risk to our people and to our business. So HR contact. So your main contact will be Renee. She is looking after all our pickers and bucket assistants out in the field. A lot of you will have talked to Tessa when you went through the application process. So Tessa is also available if Renee can't help you. That's all from me. Okay, so thank you and welcome to the team. We're really excited to have you on board this year and to get Harvest 2021-22 underway. I hope you, well, not only learnt something to answer your quiz, but maybe you also learnt something useful and interesting from the presentation. The next step is for you to complete the pre-induction questionnaire through the PurePack portal and make sure that that gets submitted before your on-site induction, so that when you get to the on-site induction, we only need to cover a few more things and then you'll be ready to go and get out there working. So thank you again, and I hope you learned something. Cheers.